And this is Wrestling with Recovery. Welcome to Wrestling with Recovery. I am your host, Zol, and this is it. Also, this is not another wrestling podcast. No, seriously, if you're tuning in for the latest scoops in the dirt, you're not going to find it here. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal medical advice. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace professional medical or legal advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or management. If you are someone you know is experiencing suicidal thoughts or a crisis, please reach out immediately to the Suicide Prevention Hotline or Lifeline, I should say, at 800-273-8255, or text home to the crisis text line at 741741. These are for the states, and these are free and confidential, which I still need to work on that in international flavor. Sorry, Ben. My name is Zol, and grateful to be here sober today talking to you as we are going to dive into today's topic. Okay, let's just I'm not gonna cut around it. No, this isn't actually it. But today's topic is one of admitting defeat through 12-step programs, whatever program you're in. Alcoholics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Sexaholics Anonymous. I mean, there's practically an anonymous for anything 12-step group. Um, you know that the first step is admitting powerlessness over whatever has you gripped. So we're going to talk about that today. Admitting defeat. I thought about different ways of trying to have a catchy headline. I'm like, this is it. And then it stuck. So, as we've been doing, as we progress here into the episode before we get to today's topic, it's time for the 3 count. These are 3 obscure, interesting, and quite possibly disturbing facts are surrounding recovery and addiction. And the month of May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So for today's 3 count, continuing to focus on May Mental Health Awareness Month, as we've done all month long. Now, if you're going back and listening to this in a different month, well, now you know. 50.5%. 2, depression rates. And 3, more than one mental disorder. Okay, that is our 3 count for today. Let's start with number 1. 50.5% of adults in the United States have had a problem with substance abuse, also suffer from mental illness. So if you enter into a 12-step recovery group, or if you hear someone classify themselves as dually diagnosed, that was a term that was very foreign for me until probably here recently. But if someone says, "Hi, I'm so and so, I'm dually diagnosed," they have been diagnosed as an addict or with substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, and they have anxiety, depression, bipolar, borderline personality disorder, whatever the mental health diagnosis is. So as you hear someone introducing themselves, if they are dually diagnosed, that is what they're referencing to. And the fact that it is 50% really isn't that high, especially when we get to the next one here on the 3 count. Number 2, youth depression rates. Okay, youth depression rates have risen 12.9% to 25.2%, well over doubled from pre-pandemic to 2021. Not surprising, because there's only so many once in a lifetime events that you can experience for the 4th time before having some sort of effect. Not surprised to see that on the youth side of things, because youth is a very early age where you are shaping social interaction and development physically, emotionally, mentally, and to have it disrupted all of a sudden to be, let's call it for what it was, confined to your house for lengths of period of time, sometimes 2.5 weeks, sometimes more. That did some damage. And looking backwards now, 12.9% to 25.2%. I think whenever the initial shock is wow, but then you really think about it and you're like, okay, that makes sense. Um, what I am curious to find, and I haven't found this yet, but I would be curious to see what the relapse rate or substance use disorder diagnose rate was, because I have a feeling it probably mirrors that. So, um, that's number two on the three count. And number three, many people suffer from more than one mental disorder at a time. Not surprising to see many of them run concurrent. There are different methods, different reasons for that. But what it comes down to is just trying to get the help started. Sometimes it is the toughest thing is admitting that you have a problem. Sometimes it is tough to track down the right mental disorder diagnosis, to help treat it. It is frustrating. I was diagnosed with anxiety, depression, borderline personality disorder, bipolar. There was a lot of different labels that went out there, and it was tough at first, because I felt ashamed. I felt less than. I felt dirty. And it took me a while before I finally said, you know what? Just because I am depressed or I am anxious or I have, um, I found strength in it, because it's like, finally, I know what's wrong with me. Or I don't want to say what's wrong with me, but I know what's bothering me, and was thankfully able to treat it. So if you're one of those that you've fallen into that here recently, that you've found, okay, well, great. Not only am I depressed, but I'm also, there's a lot more of us out there than you realize. So there you go. That is your three count for this week. So here we go. Let's get right on into the topic for this week. This is it. Um, yeah, I was really thinking about the topic and the way I wanted to go. As you've kind of seen, as we've put out the first 5, 6 episodes here, I think what this is actually episode 6. So through the first 5 episodes, we've been laying the groundwork with definitions, terms. Whenever I say this is what I mean, type deal, because coming into the substance abuse world terminology, diagnosis, and medical terms, it was overwhelming at first, especially with as much as our society is so, I don't want to say, um, I don't want to say, um, I don't even know what I want to say, because I can't think of the word right now. um, the words right on the tip of my tongue, and I'm forgetting it. But careless. There we go. Careless. Um, our society is careless with the way that we use terms, and so I thought whenever I start this podcast talking about recovery, it's going to be very important to say, okay, this is the definition that I am using, and so that way we're on common ground when understanding it. The relapse lapse conversation definitely sparked a lot of debate. I knew that would, but to the degree that it did, it got pretty hot in the kitchen, not gonna lie. Um, so yeah, but I think that's, again, even more important, why it is important to lay down the foundation of definitions and working terms as we enter deeper into discussions, and as more stories are going to be shared here on the podcast. So that all being said, this is it. This is the start. I mean, this is like the start of the start of the start. Whenever you think about whether it's your own journey or someone that you know that's in recovery, there comes a moment where maybe they don't overly admit that they have a problem, but they start to realize, I can't keep living this way. And so that's what today's episode is going to focus around. Okay. So we've established the definitions. And so now we are going to start our own journey together, whether we're deep in recovery or we're thinking about maybe recovery might be time for recovery, or how do we help someone that needs to get into recovery. This is it. Literally, this is it. This is the episode where we start. So, admitting when an addiction is an addiction. Okay, so we're going to start here. Let's go back to episode 2, where the working definition that we're using here on this podcast series, unless noted otherwise, is the definition of addiction by Dr. and author Gabor Mate. And he states, an addiction is a complex psychological, emotional, physiological, neurobiological, social, and spiritual process. It manifests itself as any behavior that gives you temporary relief, temporary pleasure, but in the long term causes harm, has some negative consequences, and you can't give it up despite those negative consequences. So we've established that. If you need a pause on that to go back to episode 2, go ahead. We'll be waiting here, figuratively, not literally. You can come back, stop this podcast now, go back to episode 2 and pick up here. So for those of you that are continuing on, I do want to make sure again to state, well, the goal of the podcast is to treat addiction in the all-encompassing cases, because I do want to shatter the stigma and help start having that conversation of where we look at addiction as more than just drugs and alcohol, but all sorts of behaviors and types of consequences as a result. For today, it probably is going to be used in the reference in the sense of alcohol and drugs. But keep in mind that this podcast goal is to try to address addiction as a whole, as anything, including above and beyond drugs and alcohol. So if you're wondering about spending, gambling, sex, attention, there's so many other things that are out there that could be considered addiction. While some may not be directly physical, keep in mind the general consequences as we move through. So from healthline.com, Dr. Timothy Legg in 2018 stated general signs of addiction are as follows: lack of control or inability to stay away from a substance or behavior, decreased socialization like abandoning commitments or ignoring relationships, ignoring risk factors such as sharing needles despite potential consequences, or perhaps financial, going into the negative and not paying bills, and physical effects like withdrawal symptoms or needing higher dosage for effect. Now, it is commonly agreed that a healthy person that can identify these behaviors put a stop to it immediately. They recognize, hey, this is the third month in a row I'm hitting negative. I'm pulling from savings. I'm asking for money. I'm spending extra gas to get this fixed, to go buy a candy bar or whatever the case may be. It is commonly agreed that a healthy person says, okay, that's it. That needs to stop. And I think when we look at our lives of more generalized cases, like, man, okay, that buffet line, whew, okay, we got to stop. We can recognize those. Conversely, I believe we can also, the hardest step is admitting that it is a problem. Someone that is showing these signs and continues despite the consequences is in early substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder, etc. It is very tough. And I think for those listening that maybe they're not in addiction and they haven't fought it personally, but they've seen someone try to go through it, or maybe they know a loved one. It's like, why don't they just stop? Why don't they just, um, whenever I think back to my struggles with alcohol, I can remember the issues that I was having with financial strain, interpersonal relationships, physical health, such as sweating, weight gain, physical shaking. Those were all, and I think back to it, and it was all different signs. And I think what was tough to admit at the time was that, I've had worse situations before. I can get a hold of it, or oh, it's not that bad. Like we stated last week, from Jeff Jarrett, professional wrestler, Hall of Famer, I can rationalize, justify, minimize. That for me, whenever I heard that, and I recognized how much I was doing each of those, not just with alcohol, but other addictive things like eating, um, and financial spending. Once I recognized those, and I recognized I was rationalized, justifying, minimizing my behavior, I was like, oh, I'm in trouble. But for those that have shopping addiction or gambling addiction, the physical side may not be as prominent for you, but I do want to note that there have been reports that shown that there is increased anxiety or physical shaking. So that's why if you're listening and thinking, okay, well, it's not drug and it's not alcoholic, I don't do any of that. Uh, I don't have those physical affections, so I'm not an addict. Here's your sign. Now, for me, I was caught in a vicious cycle for a while. I had been binge drinking, and then I would get to a point where I'd be like, oh, I'd finally feel the effects and really regret it. And then I tell myself, okay, this is it. No more. I remember, gosh, countless times, and I can remember vividly looking in the mirror. I'd put my hands on the sink, and I would look up at myself as the shower was getting started. And I wasn't happy with myself. I remember saying some pretty nasty things to myself. That's why I always say, someone can tell you the worst things and call you the worst names, but looking at yourself and not loving yourself is the toughest thing. And I remember saying, "This is it," time and time again. Okay, no, no, this time I mean it. Okay, no, seriously, this time. It was time. It was a vicious cycle, and then by day 4, day 5, that was always the tricky those were the tricky days for me. I'd get to day 4, day 5, and after my body had purged out, for the most part, a lot of the alcohol, I'd rested up, I'd, drunk a lot of, electrolytes, got that Gatorade in me, got that ice blue Gatorade to heal me, and I felt good, and it's like, "Okay, well, a little bit's not going to hurt." I would rationalize, justify, minimize that next drink. And what I think is fascinating from attending other 12-step groups and other recovery groups is you hear everyone share their stories, and it is almost verbatim that you would hear that story. You could be like, that's my story. I'm caught in that 4 or 5 day cycle. Um, And so if you're listening to this and you think to yourself, oh, I'm alone. Nope. Nope. I'll guarantee you there's many of us others that are caught in the same cycle like you. Now, for me, whenever I think about, okay, this is it, this is where it stops. For me, it was a trip to the eye doctor. I think that will be forever. Whenever I think about my recovery journey, this was years ago. I'm unfortunately not that continuously abstinent. I wish I was, but it's not the journey I was meant to be. For me, my recovery journey starts really at the eye doctor. At the time, I was in a pretty bad binge cycle, pretty vicious cycle. And I remember routine checkup. Okay, get to the eye doctor, get checked in, do all that. And of course, with the eye doctor, if you haven't been in a while, they do check your blood pressure. And I don't remember what the number was exactly, but I remember it being pretty high. And I remember I rationalized, justified, minimized as, oh well, that was I just had a couple drinks last night. And my eye doctor, okay, my eye doctor, shout out Dr. Swader. He told me, he flat out told me, he goes, Zoll, you probably need to go to the doctor, if not the ER, to go get checked out. Um, and honestly, that scared me. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm just here for my eyesight. What are you talking about, doc? Like, just let me know what my vision is. Don't tell me about my blood pressure. But it clicked with me. It's like if my eye doctor is telling me to go get my blood pressure checked, and heart disease and stroke is something that's common in my lineage. I've lost grandparents and other family to stroke and heart disease and heart attacks. It's like, okay, that's probably the first time that I was truly scared. I could admit that was probably the first time that it was like, maybe I do have a problem. And from there, I started doing the research into looking to see, am I an alcoholic? Mm, maybe. Um, so yeah, and I share this because I believe all of us in our journeys, in our recovery journeys, we have that moment. So if you're someone, maybe you've had that moment and you just don't realize it yet. Maybe you're someone looking out for a loved one and trying to have that tough conversation. Um, that aha moment will come, and maybe it's in the form of an intervention. Maybe it's just a hey, you know what? I'm really worried about you text. Those moments, you never know. And I bring this up because once again, I can't mention his name enough and how much he indirectly inspired me. Hall of Fame pro wrestler Jeff Jarrett shared in his recovery journey, and he states this as well often. I don't believe in coincidences, only convergences. Nothing happens by mistake. Nothing happens by accident. There's always a convergence. There's a reason why things happen. So I say all that because if this is something that someone recommended it to you, or you're searching and the algorithm decided, hey, you know what, this episode might be for you, um, and you're scared. Maybe you're sitting there like, okay, I don't think that I have a problem, but maybe I do. Like if you're going back and forth with it, I want you to know that it's okay. You're not alone. If you're curious if you have a problem, I'll tell you this right now, you're headed in the right direction, because whether you find out that you do have a problem or you don't, you'll know. The the worst thing that you could do is be ignorant to it and just, nah, I don't have a problem. That's my Batman. What was that? Batman 77 penguin impression. Or was it 60s? Were they back in the 60s? It was back in the 60s. Um, but you are headed in the right direction. I will say, if you're willing to look inward and say, this is something causing me more and more troubles, I better get this looked at, then you're already ahead of those that are in flat out denial, or those that are judging from the sideline and afraid to get into the game and be a part of the solution. So while you may be scared, give yourself credit for having the strength to say, okay, it's time to put a pause on this and start doing some research. Um, and so I want to finish with this, is that irregardless of your motivation, if you know whether you're looking to get healthy for yourself, you're looking to cut ties with your addiction for a loved one, for your kids, for your mom, for your dad, for your dog, for your God, for whatever. If you're wondering when is the time to put down the drink, to stop the drugging, to rein in the eating, to put a stop to the gambling, the shopping, I offer to you that there's no time like now. But if you're not ready, if you don't believe your problem truly is that bad, then stick around with the podcast. Learn a thing or three. Keep an open mind. It could, maybe you're on this path, maybe not for yourself, but for someone else. Keep an open mind. Don't just shut out and shut down. Because you never know. There again, I don't believe in I only believe in convergences. Yeah. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in convergences. Um, and this part too, I almost forgot this part. For those that are listening to this and are struggling with whether or not they have a problem, here are the two things that I wish I would have known, and I wish I would have done sooner, and I wish I would have known. And the first one is be honest with yourself. I mean, yeah, you can tell your kids, oh, yep, dad's not going to drink anymore. You can tell family, you can tell your employer, you can tell them. But if you're not honest with yourself, if you're not honest and willing to sit with yourself in that, it's going to be a very difficult journey. For me, I knew that I had a problem, but I wasn't honest with myself. And I wish I would have been. And the fact of the matter is, you don't have to be honest to anyone else. You really don't. But it's important that you're honest with yourself, because you're the one that has to look at yourself in the mirror. You're the one that has to get yourself up out of bed. You're the one that has to make that decision. No one else can make that decision for you. If someone else is poking the needle into you or forcing you at the dinner plate and shoving food down your mouth for the 10th time, or forcing you to drink, then go get help. Like, seriously, get the police involved. But in the matter of whether or not you have a problem, be honest with yourself. You don't have to tell anyone else. You really don't. Because what it comes down to is yourself. Because it's your journey. It's your life. I read a great quote that said, the average lifespan is 75 years. So think about that. If we're lucky, we get 75 Christmases. We get 75 birthdays. And then narrow it down. We get, 12 first day of schools. We get 12 last day of schools. Whenever you start looking at that, for me, whenever I did, it really hit home at how much time I've lost. And I'm still losing. I'm just going to be straight up. I'm losing time right now. And that's my punishment. Because I couldn't be honest with myself. The second part is stay curious. Don't be hard on yourself. The world's already hard enough as it is. Chances are you've got that voice in your head of someone somewhere that's told you a bunch of stuff. Be gentle on yourself, but stay curious. Go to a 12-step program. Okay, maybe that's not for you. Okay, well, there's other alternatives out there. There's harm reduction. There's therapy. There's counseling. There's, just stay curious. If that didn't work for you, stay curious. Go to the next one. Okay, you don't know what's out there? Stay curious. There's a thing called Google. Use it. Remember that it's never too late. There's never, that was your final chance. The only time that there's no more chances is in death. Until then, when life gets you down, as my good brother James Elcry would say, kick out at 2. So, wow, that did not expect that. I didn't know what to expect with this episode, but yeah, hopefully you took something away from it. So what are you watching? We got about 90 seconds left here in the program. What are you watching? I am watching Oppenheimer. In case you haven't watched it, if it's one of those movies that that is a long movie, but you don't know whether it's worth the time to sit down and watch it, it's about 3-hour watch. It's a film directed by Christopher Nolan, chronicles Dr. Oppenheimer's studies, his direction of the Los Alamos laboratory, and his 1954 security hearing, all revolving around the development of the atomic bomb, World War II. I love World War II stories. It's a guilty pleasure of mine, not going to lie. It's based on the 2005 biographical book American Prometheus. Highly recommend it. Check it out. It's almost pretty much nonstop here lately. I'm not gonna lie, it's what I'm addicted to. So I hope you've enjoyed today's program. Like, share, comment if you do, what you like, what you don't like. Always excited to hear about feedback. And until next time, this is Wrestling with Recovery.